Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The first strategic challenge in considering Syria's future has to do with its very character. Will it be a nation-state with a central government and institutions, both military and civilian, or will it split into several entities along ethnic and geographical lines? Then there is the challenge of Islamist and Jihadist forces hostile to Israel and the West. Will they prolong the war which has torn Syria for almost 14 years by keeping the flames ablaze on various fronts? All of this, plus the influence of Turkey, Iran, Russia, and others, will be analyzed by our panel, which today includes, all the way from the United States, is Professor Russell Berman, formerly served as a senior advisor at the State Department's Foreign Planning Staff, and currently is the director of the Middle East and Islamic World Working Group at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, of course. It's a pleasure to have you, Russell.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
The pleasure to have you. Also joining us from Central Israel is Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser, formerly the Director General of the Israeli Ministry for Strategic Affairs, a head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate Research and Assessment Unit, today also the Project Director at the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Relations or Foreign Affairs, among a long list of other positions. We won't go into all of them since we won't complete today's edition before we're run out of the different positions. So it's a pleasure to have you, General.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
With us here in the studio, last but not least, TV7's editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, even though we did discuss the dissectment of the different variables within Syria, which are very important, I think if we take a moment to zoom out and try evaluate the geostrategic implications of what actually happened in Syria. What are the implications now that Russia's out? What are the implications that Iran is out? Where's the United States in the story? China, which has signed with the Assad regime the Belt and Roads Initiative, as well as the Sea and Port Initiative. Where are we within this entire composition?
So leaving China out of it for the moment, you have three circles of nations with a lot of interest in Syria. You have the neighboring countries, that is Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and Turkey. You have those once removed, that is Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran. And you have other powers, namely the United States, which does not lie here in the Middle East, but obviously has global interests, and it has its central command, which is still fighting the remnants of ISIS, of Daesh, some of them within Syria. All of these forces have their hands in the jar. They want to make sure that whatever emerges in this new Syria is at least not hostile to their interests. If it can be beneficial, so much better. Now, Assad has been given political asylum in Russia, but Vladimir Putin right now has as his priority the Ukraine. He cannot and couldn't over the last couple of weeks devote a lot of resources to Syria. The question is, what is going to happen to the Russian vessels and planes at Khamimim Air Base, at Tartus or Latakia, wherever they are? Is Syria now less important strategically to Russia? What is going to happen to their Mediterranean escadra? And this will also, of course, reflect on how Israel and the United States see Syria.
Professor Berman, from your perspective, looking holistically on the Syrian state of play, what can you tell us?
Well, Jonathan, of course, we still don't know exactly what kind of regime will emerge in Damascus. But the key geostrategic points are, first of all, this has been a blow to the axis of resistance, the Muqawama. Iran's influence in Syria has plummeted. Perhaps it'll be able to rebuild it. We don't know, but it's unlikely. Therefore, Syria is very likely to cease to be a conduit of weapons from the east to the west, from Iran via Iraq into Lebanon. That's a good thing. Secondly, we're not sure what the result is going to be for Russia. As we just heard, the issue is the naval base in Tartus and the nearby air base. I think it's not that Syria ceases to be of geostrategic interest to Russia, but there's an opportunity here for the West, if we had an active diplomacy, to push Russia out of the Mediterranean. That would be a good thing. Third, there's the question of Turkey and its backing of Tahrir al-Sham. It seems to be the regional or geostrategic winner, which raises for me the question of what will the relationship be between Washington and Ankara, especially in the incoming Trump administration. President Trump was very skeptical of U.S. presence in northeast Syria. And he was very open to developing cordial relations with Erdogan. We'll have to see how that develops, which of course has enormous implications for the Kurdish cause.
General Kuperwasser, I'd like to hear your take on this, but if I may, since Professor Berman did mention the fact that this abruptly thwarts the so-called ring of fire that the Iranians have been working so prudently to erect under the guidance of Qasem Soleimani and his vision or strategy for Iran's capacity to overtake its adversaries in the region, to include Israel, Saudi Arabia, even Turkey to a certain extent. Does this now establish a certain linear crescent of Sunni states going from Turkey into Syria, into Jordan, into Saudi Arabia? And what are the implications from a geostrategic level to this new form of cohesive?
Well, first of all, it's too early to say. It's much is unclear about what's going to happen in Syria in the future, and we have to wait a little bit. But the first impression is that the most dominant force within the Syrian new regime is going to be the Muslim Brotherhood in various versions of that organization, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, led by Julani. And this is not good news. This is not the same Sunni axis that presides over Jordan and Saudi Arabia. They are members of the moderate Sunni axis, whereas Turkey and this new regime in Syria seem to be a part of the radical Sunni axis. So you can't put them together in the same basket. On the contrary, they are opponents of each other. And though we are very pleased with the fact that the Iranian axis suffered a heavy blow and to a large extent is non-existent anymore in this area, in the Sham, the Levant, we have to realize that the replacement is not way much better. So it's not surprising, for example, to see that Hamas is very pleased with the new rulers of Damascus, and they bless them and congratulate them and so on and so forth, because they are members of the same group, by and large. And this is a reason to be concerned with, and this is why Israel took the precautions it did, in order to make sure that the weapons that were left behind by the Syrian army will not fall in the hands of those extremists that are now seen to be the new rulers of Syria. That said, as I said, it's too early to draw conclusions, because inside the Syrian opposition, there are also other groups that are much more moderate than the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and its likes. And some of them are even interested in good neighborly relationships with Israel. So as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we extend the hand for those who want peace, and we are ready to cut the hand of those who want to harm us. And we have to be prepared to do both at the same time. One thing that I would say that is important to remember in this respect, yes, Turkey is gaining power, and it stands behind these groups that seem to be the new rulers of Syria. But Hezbollah is in a very bad shape. And there's no way that he can rely on the Iranians the way he did until now. And the weakness of the Iranian axis, the collapse of the Iranian axis, is going to put a lot of pressure on Hezbollah inside Lebanon. And the rebels may go after them. I'm not sure that they are going to stop at the border, or they might find allies in Lebanon to go after Hezbollah, because in this respect they have a common interest with Israel. It's an opportunity to crash Hezbollah, and that's a positive development. And we can discuss Iran, I think, later about what does it mean for Iran itself and the prospects of Iranian break to nuclear weapons and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. The fireworks show that was on display in Tripoli, northern Lebanon, following the capture of Damascus was quite evident. And that is indicative also of the deep-rooted anger at the Iranian axis, to include the most potent, or used to be the most potent, of the Iranian proxy, namely Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is now on its knees. But nonetheless, it still is powerful enough in order to pose a threat to the Lebanese state, despite it being currently in a geostrategic suffocation area that may bring it to a foregone conclusion. But Mr. Oren, I'd like to ask you specifically, before we return to the Syrian issue, the Hashemite monarchy in Jordan, of course, has been dealing with a lot of pressure from the Iranian side, which has had some sort of an arrangement with the Ikhwan, or the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, which also threatened to topple the monarchy in the kingdom of in Amman, that is. Will this also bring a certain boiling point from the perspective of those, say, Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations and crime syndicates in Jordan that could try and affiliate themselves with Syria?
Well, they may try, but the Jordanian armed forces and intelligence services seem to have quite a lot of control. Of course, we will find out if there is a challenge. One never knows. But no, it doesn't seem that way. And Jordan is a peace partner of Israel and a security partner. And you know, for the first 25 years of the State of Israel, the major threat was an invasion by Arab armies from adjacent countries. Then it became rockets, missiles, sometimes artillery, such as in Lebanon, to the extent that Israel neglected the threat of invasion, and October the 7th, of course, demonstrated it. Now Israel has taken out the missiles and rockets of at least three forces around it: Hamas, Hezbollah, and Syria. It's a new strategic landscape.
Absolutely. Well, Professor Berman, let's talk a little bit about the axis of Qatar and Turkey, since those two countries do not necessarily have the funds, despite Qatari oil and foundations and whatever it does across the world, in order to reconstruct the entirety of Syria, which is in ruin. Does that not mean that its capacity to assert total influence as it tries to message around the world is not necessarily as deep-rooted as it would like it to be, considering the necessity to involve additional countries and the reluctance, particularly of Europe and the United States, to be a partner to that reconstruction?
Jonathan, let me come to the reconstruction question in 1 second, but I'd like to return to a point you made in passing before, the animosity toward Hezbollah in Lebanon and in Syria. One of the first stories one of the first moving stories that hit the world press about the prisoners coming out of the Syrian prisons was about a Lebanese man who had been captured by the Syrian occupation of Lebanon, um, and now was coming out of a Syrian prison 40 years later. The animosity of the Sunni in northern Lebanon, as well as the population in Syria toward Hezbollah, is enormous. So this is not an army, but this is an important strategic factor. Now, with regard to the Qatari and Turkish role in Syria moving forward, I think we're way before any reconstruction plan for Syria. What is clear is that Turkey, in particular, is a moving force behind Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and therefore the victory of this organization, and it does lead the victorious forces, is a Turkish one, and Turkey is therefore going to have enormously increased influence inside of Syria, actually possibly in northern Lebanon as well. And as I said before, this is going to have implications for the SDF, for the Kurds in the north. Um, you talked about a Sunni axis. There has been a Shia axis, to be sure. I don't think that religious solidarity holds the Sunni together in the way that it does the Shia. There are moderate Sunni and there are radical Sunni. There's a big range between Jordan and Turkey. I don't see religion as the issue here. It's going to be strategic interest.
Well, General Kuperwasser, strategic interests. Let's talk about the Russians, since their hot water base in Tartus was historically part of the Soviet Empire and had been a very important focus of the Russians to maintain their direct access to the Mediterranean in order to also reach their various places of interest throughout Africa. Are we expected to see this right now change entirely? The Russians are entirely out, or do they still have a certain contingent in the country?
I have a big difficulty expecting some sort of reconciliation between the new government in Syria and Russia. It's too much bad blood over there. The Russians were those who were bombing them day in, day out. They saved the Syrian regime from the Assad regime for so many years, ever since 2015. I can't believe that they're going to have some reconciliation. And because of that, what I do see is an effort by the rebels or the new government to make themselves acceptable in the minds of Western countries. The need for reconstruction is so big that their expectations is not Qatar, and Qatar can help, but the main expectation is to see Western Europe lending a hand. That's what they want to see happening. And we saw that today that the British government said that we are not yet ready to change, to take the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham off the list of terror groups. It's going to take a while. It's going to take a big effort by Giuliani to convince the West to accept him. But the issue is on the table, and I don't know what President Trump is going to think about it. And they have a lot of work to do to convince the West to accept them, because their history is very problematic. But the West would be quite ready if it gets strong enough indications that this is not the same policy that characterized these groups in the past, to get involved in help to reconstruct Syria. And that is a sign that can be translated into some positive directions. Although it's too, again, I say it's too early to say if it's going to work or not. We in Israel, I think, would like to see that happening, provided that the signs that are provided by Jolani and these people are considerable, and that he gives place in his government to all the different groups in Syria, including those who are more moderate, really, and are interested in cooperation with Jordan and cooperation with Israel and so on and so forth, and Saudi Arabia. Emirates, and so on and so forth. That's it's an open question, and but I think that the first indications we get is that Giuliani understands it, and so he has in his group some people that do not like this idea. He himself is trying to push in this direction. We saw this interview with CNN. That was a clear step in this direction. And some other moves that they are taking right now indicates that this is the direction he would like to go. He's going to face opposition from within his own group. That's when he starts walking in this way. And we'll see how this works out.
Well, it takes a little bit more than just two to tango in this context. But Professor Berman, I'd like to hear your take on this. Can the United States accept a man and a group of people who have American blood on their hands, European blood on their hands, and have been actively pursuing a policy of fighting the United States for a better part of their entire lives?
Listen, Jonathan, in the world of politics, change is always possible. And if there were a clear indication that Giuliani was going to turn to reach out to the West to demonstrate some liberal tolerance within Damascus, I think the force of politics would be towards some cooperation. But as General Kuperwasser has said, it's unclear right now. There are aspects of the new regime that point toward a dark Islamist future. What is his name? Mohammed al-Bashir has Islamist roots in Idlib, which is one of the worst one of the worst scenarios. On the other hand, Giuliani seems to be making other signs. I would think that it's in the interest of the West to indicate an openness toward a Syrian regime that is open to the West. Otherwise, we can push it back in another direction, which would not be to the advantage of the West.
Well, we're drawing near to the end of the program, and I'd like to give each and every one of you a minute and a half or so to analyze prospects for the future of Syria, and then we'll play the recording back after you made those assumptions in the future and see whether or not you got it right. So take it seriously. We'll start with General Kuperwasser. Good luck with that.
Well, as I said, it's clear that more is expected because Syria is made of so many sects and groups, ethnic groups, religion groups, religious groups. It's such a big mix, and they were not experiencing this new phenomenon of freedom for so long that it's all new for them. We shall have to see. They didn't. There were groups inside the Syrian opposition that were preparing all kinds of papers of how this nation should look like once it is released from Assad's control. But these are not accepted by all the groups, and they will have to work out some sort of an arrangement between them. So in the meanwhile, they will have to focus on stabilizing the situation and the inner fightings, and will not be a big problem, I guess, to the people around them. It's especially I worry about us, of course. And but in the longer term, that's a big question mark, and to what direction they're going to go. And the voices you hear from the leadership are really source of concern because we all saw some of the rebels entering the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus and speaking about let's go now to Al-Quds, to Jerusalem, and people of Gaza just be patient, we're coming. If this is what's going to be the leading theme of this new regime, in a way of avoiding the need to handle the internal problems, that's something we should be cautious about.
Cautious, and I wouldn't advise it to them, but that's a different story. Professor Berman?
Well, as we've heard, there's still a lot of ambiguity. We don't know who's going to win in the internal struggles inside the new regime. A regime like this is going to have to decide whether it will pursue its Islamist DNA, or whether it is going to act in the national interest of Syria, that would include some kind of reconciliation with the West and therefore an opportunity for rebuilding. But the West isn't going to accept that unless there's an indication that the extremists are not in charge. I do think that we will know a lot from about the future of the regime from its actions with regard to foreign policy, and the West should do what it can to encourage Syria to make the right decisions. First of all, this includes a complete expulsion of the Russians from the Mediterranean. Secondly, a definitive break with Iran. Third, we're going to have to watch very closely what their relationship is to Israel, as Israel wisely tries to establish a buffer zone. Will the regime respond with hostility or with signs of reconciliation? And then finally, the complicated question of Turkey and the Kurds.
Mr. Oren, one sentence?
Well, one wonders whether the Russians will plot an Assad comeback if they are really expelled and if they need Syria as a base.
Will the Iranians just roll over and die? Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens here. But
Inshallah.
Inshallah. I'd like to immediately thank Professor Berman, General Kuperwasser, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at tv7israelnews.com.